Good morning and welcome to the Prado Museum. I'm here for our weekly sessions in English, and today we are looking at this beautiful painting by Hieronymus Bosch. Thank you so much to our donors for making programs like this possible. The American Friends of the Prado Museum does programs like this, but also a lot of other projects that support the Prado Museum. So check them out, as well as our sister organization here in Spain, Fundación Amigos del Museo del Prado. So today we're taking a look at this beautiful work by Hieronymus Bosch. We're here in this room, which has a collection of his work, which is one of the most important and extensive in the world, including, of course, our Garden of Earthly Delights, his most known painting. But today I'm going to be talking about actually the smallest painting in this room, which we see over here. This is the Extraction of the Stone of Madness. And has a lot of very interesting details, metaphors, symbolism, and commentary about life in the 16th century in what is modern-day Netherlands. So to start us off, I wanted to just think about this collection at the Prado that we have. So as some of you might know, the basis of this collection are works of art that were collected by the Habsburg Spanish monarchs, beginning with King Felipe II, and he was a huge fan of Bosch, right? And so the collection that we see today began with his interest, and he picked super well. So we're excited to have this collection. But what's also interesting, because the Prado collection originally comes from this monarch perspective, most of the images that we see in these spaces are either from a religious context or a more noble context. And so it's rarer to see images of everyday life depicted in these spaces. However, when it comes to Bosch, we see a bit more of that. And in this image specifically, we see a very everyday scene. First of all, the characters that we see here are not noble characters. They are lower class or middle class people in the Netherlands in the 16th century. And then the place that they are. This is not a noble place. They are in the middle of a field. However, they are doing something weird, right? An interesting activity is taking place. We see a surgery taking place. And the fact that this is kind of contextualized as an everyday scene is something that we can take a look at. Now, I also want to note the composition here. Obviously, right here in the center, we have the image that we're looking at painted in a circle. And around it, we have, a black painted frame along with lettering in a Gothic style in gold, which tells us a little bit more information about what's happening in the image. So the part on the top is in an early Dutch language, which translates to "Master, rid me of this stone." And in the bottom here, it says, "My name is Lubbert das." So we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means, but the shape itself refers to a mirror more than a frame. So we're going to learn a little bit about what's happening in this image, what kind of commentary he's making, and why he would frame it as a mirror for us to do some level of self-criticism, to think about society and how this image might relate to our own lives. So Lubbert das, right, the character that we see here in the center, the one receiving the surgery in this case, is a literary character that comes from the Netherlands, and we can hear about in proverbs and stories, shows up in literature every once in a while. And he's sort of the representation of laziness, of silliness, and of madness. And we see him sort of operating as a symbol here in this painting. As we see, he's dressed, he's a lower class figure, his clogs are right underneath his seat here. And what he's done in the case of this story is he's requested to have a stone, which is, he believes, the cause of his madness or the cause of his ailment, be removed from his skull using a scalpel, with the idea that it will make him well, it will cure him of whatever ails him. Now, before moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about this term madness, right? We see it in the title of this work, but we also have to acknowledge that throughout history, this word madness has been used to conflate a whole variety of different conditions all at the same time, and we don't use it in the same way today. So madness could be used to refer from everything from mental illness to disability to insubordination to naivete to silliness and even to lust. So the point here is that you have, in the case of madness as it's referred to, someone who is not compliant with societal norms for whatever reason, doing some kind of moral divergence, and there's an interest in bringing them back to the path. And in this case, surgery was the method selected. So in Christian Europe in the 16th century, all of scientific studies would have lived in the space of a religious context. So anything scientific would have been needed to fit into a religious belief system. And anything related to madness would have been related to demonology. And so the kind of superstitions and the scientific methods, in this case that we see depicted, are depicted in this way for that reason. Now, think about society at the time in a space where if you are doing any kind of behavioral divergence from the norm, or you are seen as being silly or naive or mad, that you would have to have the stone removed from your head. This is a space where people in society could take advantage, and that's also what we see happening in this image. So this figure over here, who Lubbert refers to as the master, right, or the doctor as we could see it today, is actually a swindler. He is not a real deal doctor. And we know this for a couple of reasons. One, doctors at the time were actually not allowed to use scalpels to do surgery. That was a tool that was only available to what's called barber surgeons. However, a barber surgeon was not allowed to wear a long coat. So this character we see wearing a long coat, using a scalpel for surgery, and it creates this tension. Who is this character? Who are they impersonating, and why are they doing this procedure on Lubbert Das? The other key that we see in this image that tells us a little bit about this character is this funnel on his head, which is a metaphor. It's representing a concept that is also related to this idea of madness. Now, thinking about for a second, a funnel, what it's for as a tool, is to take some material and pass it neatly and efficiently from one space to another. But it only works if it's facing up to down, right? We need gravity to make a funnel work. To put it upside down on top of a head is the opposite. It doesn't function in the same way, and that's why it's representing madness in this case. So backing up for a second, we have Lubbert Das, this metaphorical figure who's a representation of laziness and madness, and he's asked to remove this stone from his head by a doctor who's a swindler, also a representation of madness. And then we have two other characters in this image who are looking on, complicit, and they are both members of the church. So we have a friar and a nun who are looking on, perhaps putting their blessing on what's happening, perhaps being there to perform last rites if this guy doesn't make it. But all of the characters in this scene tell us a story about its ridiculousness. Bosch is being satirical, being ironic, telling us all the levels of madness that are taking place here. Now, interestingly enough, we talked about Lubbert Das being this character that comes up throughout Dutch proverbs and stories. In all likelihood, an operation such as this, the removal of the stone from the head, is not something that would have ever really happened, but it's referred to perhaps as a cautionary tale. The last thing I want to mention too is if we look very, very closely at what this surgeon or Dr. Swindler is removing from the head, it's actually not a stone, it's a flower. And so this flower, scholars have said, is likely a white water lily, which has medicinal qualities which are also very interesting, of being a narcotic, but were also taken in convents to try to suppress lust. So we add another layer to this painting, this Dr. Swindler removing lust from the head of Lubbert Das in order to free him and bring him back to the moral right. The last thing I'm going to point out before wrapping up, in the very back of the painting, we have this little space. It's difficult to know exactly what is there, but I think it looks a bit like gallows, and it adds a whole nother layer to this story, some kind of foreshadowing. All of the levels of madness of this process, requesting to have the stone removed, having the stone removed by a swindler with the objective of coming back to the moral right, and if not, what would happen to you then? So as we look at this image, thinking of it as a mirror, we can think to ourselves, what are those types of madnesses that we have in our society today, our consumption, our brutality to others, and think of it from 520 years later, how it might relate. Thank you so much for joining me today for our weekly sessions in English. We look forward to seeing you next week.